Everyone gasped when he interrupted the wedding ceremony. But what happened next defied every assumption about love, beauty, and human worth. The whispers started before she even turned 16. Every time she walked down Main Street, conversations would pause, heads would turn, and cruel words would follow her like shadows. "There goes the ugliest girl in town," they'd say, not bothering to lower their voices. Children pointed openly while their mothers pretended to scold them, though you could see the smirks they tried to hide. What makes people so mean about looks anyway? Well, this young woman became the target everyone seemed to agree on. The baker's wife would shake her head sadly. The school teacher would whisper to other ladies at church. Even the town drunk had opinions about her appearance, which really says something about how far the gossip had spread. Her family didn't help matters much. They were dirt poor, the kind of poor that makes neighbors cross the street to avoid asking how you're doing. Her father worked odd jobs when he could find them, and her mother took in sewing that barely paid for thread. The family lived in a tiny house on the wrong side of town, where the roads turned to mud every time it rained. Nobody visited, nobody cared. Let's not forget how marriage worked back then. A woman's looks were basically her currency, and this girl was considered bankrupt before she even started. No young men came calling. No fathers approached her parents about arrangements. The years crawled by while other girls her age found husbands and started families. She watched from her window as wedding parties passed by, knowing she'd never be the bride everyone celebrated. But here's the weird part, she never stopped working. While other girls primped and practiced piano, she helped her father fix roofs and patch walls. She learned to haggle at the market, stretch every penny, and make meals from scraps that would make a restaurant chef jealous. Her hands grew strong from hauling water and chopping wood. Her back stayed straight despite carrying the weight of everyone's cruel stares. The loneliness cut deeper than the insults, though. Picture eating dinner every night with parents who couldn't meet your eyes because they knew what the town thought of their daughter. Imagine walking past groups of girls your age who went silent the moment you appeared. She'd lie awake wondering if she'd spend her whole life as the town's favorite target for cruel jokes. Then there were the church services where she sat alone while other families filled entire pews. The harvest festivals where she helped serve food but never got asked to dance. The Christmas celebrations where she watched other young women receive gifts from suitors while she got nothing but pitying looks from the preacher's wife. Makes sense that she'd start hoping for something better, right? Years passed like this, each one making her situation seem more hopeless. The other girls got married and moved away or started families in town. She remained still working, still enduring whispers, still believing somewhere deep down that her story wasn't over yet. Nobody could have predicted what would happen next. The proposal came from a merchant's son, not exactly a romantic fairy tale, but beggars can't be choosers. Her father nearly fainted when the young man's family approached with the offer. After years of watching other girls get married off while his daughter remained invisible, he saw this as divine intervention. The families quickly agreed on terms. No one questioned why this particular suitor had suddenly taken interest. Desperation has a way of making people skip the uncomfortable questions. Her mother spent weeks preparing for the wedding with the intensity of a general planning battle. They had almost nothing, but somehow she managed to create something beautiful from scraps of fabric donated by sympathetic neighbors. The dress took shape stitch by careful stitch, each thread carrying hopes for a better future. Well, at least someone in the family would finally escape the crushing weight of their reputation. The wedding day arrived with all the fanfare their small budget could manage. The local church filled up faster than expected. Half the town showed up, though not necessarily for the right reasons. Some came out of genuine goodwill, others out of morbid curiosity. Weddings involving the town's most pitied family tend to draw crowds. People love a spectacle, especially when they can feel superior while watching it unfold. She stood at the altar in her mother's masterpiece, hands trembling but head held high. The groom looked pale, shifting his weight from foot to foot like a man standing on hot coals. Minutes passed, then more minutes. The murmurs started quietly but grew louder as reality sank in. The bride-to-be kept glancing toward the church doors, hope fading with each passing second. But why would someone propose just to run? The groom's friends later admitted they dared him to go through with it. A cruel bet that went too far. He'd never intended to actually marry her. Just wanted to prove he could get anyone to say yes. The humiliation cut deeper than any of the town's previous cruelties. At least those had been honest in their meanness. The crowd began whispering, some covering their mouths in shock, others shaking their heads in disgust. A few started gathering their things to leave. The poor girl stood frozen, understanding what had happened, but unable to process the betrayal fully. Her parents looked like they wanted the earth to swallow them whole. The whole scene felt like watching a house burn down in slow motion. Then there's the historical context that makes this even more brutal. Nearly 1 in 10 arranged marriages in 19th century small towns ended abruptly, often leaving families financially ruined and socially destroyed. Women had few options for recovery from such public humiliation. Most ended up moving away or living as outcasts forever. Just as the last guests started heading for the doors, something unexpected happened. A voice cut through the awkward shuffling and whispered conversations. Someone who'd been watching quietly from the back suddenly stood up, and what he said next would change everything in ways no one saw coming. The humiliation hung in the air like smoke from a dying fire. People shuffled toward the door, whispering behind their hands about what they'd just witnessed. The bride stood frozen at the altar, still clutching her bouquet of wildflowers. Her mother dabbed tears with a handkerchief that had seen better days. Then something unexpected happened. A chair creaked near the back of the room. Heavy boots echoed on wooden floors as someone stood up. The whispers died down. Everyone turned to see who was making noise during their dramatic exit. It was Thomas Mackenzie, the rancher from the edge of town. He wasn't the type to draw attention to himself. Most folks knew him as the quiet man who came to town twice a month for supplies and never stayed long enough for small talk. His ranch sat about 5 miles out, where the prairie stretched endlessly toward the horizon. Mackenzie cleared his throat. The room went dead silent. "If no one will have her," he said in a voice that carried to every corner, "I'll take her right now." The crowd gasped like they'd all been slapped at once. Someone dropped a hymnal. Mrs. Henderson's jaw fell open so wide you could have caught flies. A few people actually laughed out loud, thinking he was making some kind of joke. But Mackenzie wasn't smiling. He walked down the aisle with steady steps, his hat in his hands. His clothes were clean but worn, the kind a man wears when he works with his hands every day. He wasn't handsome by town standards, but he wasn't ugly either. Just solid, like a fence post that could weather any storm. "I'm serious," he said, looking directly at the abandoned bride. "This whole town's been cruel enough for one day." The preacher stood there with his mouth hanging open, Bible still in his hands. He'd performed hundreds of weddings, but nothing like this. The bride stared at Mackenzie like he'd just spoken in a foreign language. "You don't even know me," she whispered. "I know enough," Mackenzie replied. "I know you help your parents every day. I've seen you working in that garden, making something grow in soil that should be dead. I know you're tougher than half the men in this room." Some of the crowd started muttering again. This wasn't how things were supposed to go. Weddings had rules, proper procedures. You couldn't just swap grooms like trading horses. But Mackenzie owned land, real land with cattle and crops. That meant something, even if his timing was strange. The bride looked at her parents, then back at this unexpected stranger. Her original groom was probably halfway to the next county by now. The whole town was watching, waiting to see what she'd do next. What happened next would surprise everyone in that room, including Mackenzie himself. That very same day, she packed her few belongings and rode out to the rancher's land. The town disappeared behind them as their wagon rolled across miles of open prairie. No more pointing fingers. No more cruel whispers. Just endless sky and grass swaying in the wind. The ranch sat alone under that big sky with a modest house, a barn, and corrals stretching toward the horizon. Her new husband, let's call him Samuel, wasn't much for fancy words, but he showed her around with quiet pride. "Cattle need checking twice daily," he said, pointing toward distant specks grazing on hillsides. "Chickens don't feed themselves, and the vegetable garden fights weeds like they're personal enemies." She rolled up her sleeves. Dawn meant milking cows and collecting eggs before most folks even opened their eyes. Midday brought mending fences, hauling water, and cooking hearty meals for Samuel and whatever hired hands showed up during busy seasons. Evenings, more chores. Ranch life didn't care about your feelings or your past, it just demanded work. But here's the surprising part. She was good at it. Really good. Within weeks, she'd reorganized the chicken coop for better egg production. She figured out which cows were getting sick before Samuel even noticed. Her vegetable garden started producing more food than they could eat, so she began trading surplus with neighboring ranches. The woman everyone called ugly was proving herself invaluable in ways that mattered out here. Then there's the fascinating reality of frontier life. Women weren't just decoration on the prairie, they were essential partners. Recent historical research shows that over 30% of women in certain Western territories worked the land directly. They drove cattle, operated machinery, and made crucial business decisions. Beauty contests didn't exist when survival was the daily priority. Samuel started asking for her opinion on everything. Which pasture should they use for spring grazing? How much grain to buy for winter? She'd never been asked for her thoughts on important matters before. Makes sense, right? In town, people only saw her face. On the ranch, they saw her capable hands and sharp mind. Word traveled fast across the prairie, even between isolated ranches. Neighbors began hearing about Samuel's wife. Not her appearance, but her skills. She can doctor a sick calf better than most veterinarians, one rancher told another. Fixed our broken plow when my own hired man couldn't figure it out. The weird part is how quickly everything changed. 6 months earlier, she couldn't walk down Main Street without enduring stares and snickers. Now she was gaining respect from people who judged others by their abilities, not their looks. Samuel noticed the transformation too, though not the one you might expect. She didn't suddenly become conventionally beautiful. Instead, he started seeing something others had missed entirely. The beauty in her determination, her kindness towards struggling animals, her clever solutions to everyday problems. But the real test of their partnership was coming. The prairie had ways of challenging even the strongest relationships, and their first winter together would reveal just how deep their connection really ran. The rancher's eyes began to see something the town had missed completely. Where others saw flaws, he noticed how she never complained during brutal winter storms. Her hands might have been rough, but they could gentle a spooked horse or stitch up a wounded calf without hesitation. Beauty, he realized, had nothing to do with what people whispered about in the general store. Their marriage grew stronger each year, like oak roots digging deeper into prairie soil. When drought hit 3 summers running, she didn't panic or blame anyone. Instead, she found ways to stretch every drop of water and every grain of feed. The cattle survived. Their neighbors' herds didn't always fare as well. Word travels fast in small communities, especially when it's good news for a change. Women who once crossed the street to avoid her started showing up at the ranch, asking for advice about sick livestock or failed gardens. Makes sense, right? Success has a way of making people forget their old opinions pretty quickly. Then there's the matter of respect, which is worth more than gold in farming country. The banker who once ignored her family now tipped his hat when she rode into town. Store owners offered credit without hesitation. Even the preacher's wife, who had been particularly cruel with her comments, asked if she might visit sometime to learn about preserving vegetables. But the real change happened when she started hiring local girls who reminded her of herself. Young women from poor families, maybe not blessed with perfect features, but willing to work hard. She taught them everything: how to read weather patterns, manage accounts, and most importantly, how to hold their heads high, despite what small minds might say. Well, these girls didn't stay invisible for long. Ranch work builds character and confidence in ways that sitting in parlors never could. They learned to rope cattle, fix broken equipment, and negotiate with grain buyers. One married a successful farmer. Another started her own business selling preserves to the railroad crews, and the weird part is how quickly the town's memory shifted. The same people who once called her the ugliest woman around now spoke of her as that successful rancher's wife, or the one who really knows about livestock. Funny how prosperity changes people's eyesight, isn't it? Years passed, and her story became something mothers told their daughters, not as a fairy tale, but as proof that real worth comes from what you do, not how you look. The young women she mentored spread across 3 counties, carrying her lessons with them. Let's not forget the most important lesson here. The town had been wrong about everything that mattered. They judged a book by its cover and nearly missed one of the most valuable people they'd ever known. Her true beauty lay in her unbreakable spirit, her generous heart, and her refusal to let cruelty define her future. Sometimes the person everyone overlooks turns out to be exactly the hero the story needed, and that's a truth worth remembering, no matter what century you're living in.